Thank you, Pranab. That was very insightful and helpful. And our next and final speaker is Tibisay Vera. She's both a chartered accountant and a neuroscientist. And she's going to take us through three key areas of Agile and the brain, starting with a definition of neuroscience and how it can relate to Agile, moving on to how Agile complements the adoption of brain-friendly practices, and then finally some practical tips for how to apply neuroscience in your Agile delivery. So Tibisay, over to you.
Thank you, Justin, for the nice introduction. Yes, a lot of people usually ask, what is the relationship, right, between neuroscience and Agile or businesses? And what is interesting is that until probably 10, 15 years ago, neuroscience was mainly around the physical parts of the brain. However, now, the science has moved much more, and we know that neuroscience is the study more and more with our behavior, the learning. It has to be with the decision-making processes. And most importantly, after all this research that has been done during the last 10 years, is that now we understand more and more how our brain is hardwired to actually respond to uncertainty. Now we understand much better how our brain behaves when we have continuous change processes. And that is how it becomes relevant to Agile. Because as Eric and Pranab took us earlier, very much Agile is a framework that starts with a mindset, a group of values, processes, tools, or other way around. A group of processes, and it takes you and change your mindset. It could be both ways. So what does it mean is within Agile framework, we basically create this mindset and we create an ability to actually respond better to change. And that's how we believe by knowing how the brain deals with change, by knowing a little bit more about how to apply the neuroscience, that means we can actually prepare much more for the continuous environment of change. The idea is to use some tricks for us to actually embrace much better uncertainty. And that is the reason why we've been doing a lot of research. It seems like Agile is a much more brain-friendly framework than actually waterfall. And we will see that in the next few minutes. There is a huge field going on, but I just trying to very quickly in this little time that we have to introduce you about why is that, right? So how do we actually apply neuroscience? This is the question I always keep having, right? How can we use it? And it's very much so far into three areas. One of them is what we call neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? It's this capacity that have our brain to change. We now know that our brain change. What does it mean? It changed the physical structure, but also changed the connection, the neural path that we have. And that is what is key for change, because it means we are able to create new connections to support change. So by knowing exactly how neuroplasticity works, we can embrace much better change. The second one is the chemistry. By us knowing, and the project team and the organization knowing a little bit about the chemistry of the brain. We don't know to go and study all the way neuroscience, but to know some of the basic neurotransmitters out there, we can trick our brain. We can encourage to release one or to release another one to support also change and to embrace uncertainty. And the last part is brain waves. This is like during especially the last 4 years, it has been a huge big boom about brainwaves. I will not go in the whole detail in this presentation about what brainwaves are, but we have different stages of brainwaves. Like the beta is the one when we're really fully concentrated, and then there are some alpha waves when we are more in kind of mind wandering. So by knowing a bit more about them, we can actually support to embrace better uncertainty. How? by allowing a little bit of mind-wandering activities to reduce stress, to release cortisol, and then we accept much better change. So that's give you a little bit of an overview really about what is the relation between them. I hope so.
Thanks, Tibisay. That's a really useful overview of exactly what neuroscience is. Quite keen to see how it can be adopted for brain-friendly approach in the next section. So for the next section, we're going to look at how Agile complements the adoption of brain-friendly practices. So Tibisay, over to you.
Yeah, definitely. To start that, one of the first things is we need to better understand what is the fundamental role of the brain. Actually, if I ask you, any of you out there, why do we have a brain? What is the actual role of the brain? A lot of people will think is, well, to move. Some people will say is to think. Some people say is to coordinate, is the master of all the coordination of the human being. We now know that it's much simpler and much more simpler and much more complex than that. The real role of the brain and the fundamental role of the brain is to ensure perpetuations of the species, right? And that's the reason why the brain is hardwired and we have a brain. Now, what does it mean? How can we be hardwired to perpetuate through the species? Well, it has to ensure basically two things. One of them is we are hardwired to protect us from threat. It gives us safety very much. Otherwise, we will never, right, perpetuate through the species. And the second part, and most importantly, at least the really new part that neuroscience is bringing on, we are also hardwired to look for reward. And it is the balance, as I call the right balance between protection from threat to looking for reward. What is the key of peak performance, is the key for well-being, for engagement, and for embracing change. And I explain better, like, for example, if we are in a really comfortable, rewarding, pleasurable mood, we will probably don't have enough energy to move because we're in just this ideal place. So that means we need a little bit of all the hormones, chemistry that it comes from protection from threat. We need a little bit of that chemistry of what it is escaping from a lion. Now, if on the other hand, we are too much in a threat state, which usually is when we are having continuous changes, it tends to be more that part that we are, then we don't have all the motivation, the creativity, and the engagements that we need. And that's why knowing, that's where neuroscience becomes so important, is knowing the right balance where to be, very much. Let me start for the brain reward system without going too much detail. There is a recent theory, it's less than 18 years old, where we now know that the brain reward system have two parts. One of them is what we call the anticipatory phase of the reward system. Is this wanting? Is I feel rewarded because I'm looking for something, I'm perusing for something, right? And that is the motivation I have to complete a goal. This, in very simple terms, is usually driven by dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter involved very much in this anticipatory phase. Now we know that there is a second phase that it kicks off after we achieve a goal. And this phase is the consummatory phase, is the phase of the pleasure, is the phase of liking. And this is driven by the opioid system. Most specifically, one of the neurotransmitters that you might know and the public knowledge know is the endorphins. The endorphins are part of the opioid system. What happened is when we are, to put it in terms of agile and project management, once we are looking to complete something, when we are perusing a change, you are perusing to complete anything that we're working on, usually dopamine kick off. And this invigorate all the actions that we need to do to be able to complete those goals. right? However, if we are in an environment which is, for example, waterfall, this dopamine just remain up, 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 up. And because it takes too long to complete it, sometimes people lose motivation of it. However, within Agile, and I bring the picture that Erica showed you earlier, Agile is very much about really small iterations. It's about doing these sprints that usually last 2 or 3 weeks maximum, right? So what it is nice, and that's how we call it brain friendly, is because within that period of time, we allow our brain reward system to actually complete cycle. Because we are 2 weeks in perusing, dopamine is flowing, and we feel motivated, and then we achieve it. We succeed. And we succeed in actually doing what we wanted, or we succeed in learning what went wrong, but we succeed. So the brain usually perceives that it gives you the dopamine that you need for the motivation, and when you achieve it, most importantly, it actually releases the endorphins. So we are able in really short periods of time to have endorphins. And endorphins are key. Endorphins are so important. Why? Because endorphins change the perception of pain. And our brain usually perceives change as a pain, right? So what happened is within Agile environment, we have 2 weeks of perusing of content, little short releases of dopamine, and that support motivation and that support engagement, which is the role of dopamine. And after, we release endorphins, and then we change the perception of pain. And it's much easier to go into the second iteration, much easier to go into the third iteration, because you are embracing. That is when we say we are starting to embrace the change itself. Now, let's move a little bit to the brain threat system, right? We spoke about the brain reward system. Let's talk about the threat system. What research have told us, and this is amazing, is that our brain perceives on the same way social pain than physical pain. The same structures that we have in the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, probably you don't need to know about it, all of them highlight exactly on the same way. So what happened is once we adopt Agile methodology, right? Usually our brain detects much, much less mistakes, less errors. Why? Because they are in small chunks. And as a result, our brain have less physical pain. Because let's be honest, our brain is an ancient brain. We have been hardwired to escape and to survive from the lions and to eat and have pleasure when we eat and having sex to reproduce. And in that way, we ensure the perpetuation of the species. Now, the reality is nowadays is social pain what we have there, is social rewards what we have there. There is an interesting model that was developed by David Rock in 2008, and we every day learn more and more how to apply this model. I really like this model, especially for Agile environments. So just to describe it very quickly, what this model is about. This model basically demonstrated that there are 5 areas or 5 social areas that behave even closer to physical pain. And they are these 5 that you are watching here. Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. What does it mean? If I am a lot of status, and I feel my status is high, the same like you, I'm more in a rewarded state. If I feel like I have certainty, my brain lies, know what is happening next, I still feel rewarded. The brain likes control, to have the autonomy. But the same with the relatedness. If I feel like I belong to a group, I'm more in a rewarded state. And same with fairnesses. And this it changed a little bit person to person. Some people are more into rewarded state if they are with fairness and with status. But those are the 5 that impact the most. So what is this important? Is because within agile environments, we usually reduce all the differences in status. We usually will put a pool of group of people who also relate because they are all engaged working in the same objective and the same goal, and the brain perceives it much more fair. So that means we move a little bit more into a reward state rather than a threat state. Now you will ask me, why do we need to move away from all the threat state? We need a little bit of threat, as I say. The problem with threat is that when we are in high levels of threat, like change is one of the biggest threats that we have, as the brain perceives it, saying like physical pain, it will release a lot of cortisol and a lot of adrenaline. And cortisol, what physically does is reduce our peripheral vision. Cortisol and we reduce that vision, and our brain doesn't realize if physical vision or not. And this will translate in less creativity. So it is very important for us to be with lower cortisols if we want to enhance creativity and also to have and to support insights, which is what we need during change. So that is the important to trying to move on into a rewarded state. Also, people and the end customers, the end users are more likely to accept the change that you're having if they engage from the first day. And this is what Agile is proposing. We engage all the stakeholders from day one. What happened is these people that you are engaging, they feel somehow they are in control. They feel they have autonomy of what is going on. And as a result, also we move more into a rewarded state. So I hope, Justin, not sure if you have any question, if explained clearly.
That was really good. I think people that have participated in an agile change will be thinking probably of the demo at the end of the sprint, where the stakeholders, the product owner comes in and the team demonstrate what they've achieved. And if it's gone well, there's a great feeling, and there's certainly a lot of reward. And you're right, Agile breaks the status down. It's one team. It's not us versus them. It's a we contribution. We've done this collectively. And I think it makes, whether it's met the success criteria or not, people still feel involved and they feel progress has been made, and they will feel accountable and responsible. And they look forward to the next short sprint. It's not, in waterfall sometimes it can take so long to get through a requirements phase. And then you get to the end of it and maybe it hasn't been successful. Maybe it's not enough detail to pass to the next stage in the sequence. And people lose the will to live, they lose interest. In this way, at least there's a high repetition, it's collective, and there's something to show at the end of each sprint. So it was really interesting to see the theory of the brain applied to the methodology. Thanks.
Yeah. And as you say, right, this celebration period of every 2 weeks after the sprint is so important. If there is something I would like you to take out of this webinar, is that we need to celebrate after we achieve any goal that we have, because that celebration will encourage the endorphins to release, and as a result, people will have more pressure, and as a result, we change the perception of pain. Yeah,
that's great. Thanks. Hi, Tibisay. So now we're on to our third part of your presentation, which is all around practically applying the neuroscience you've discussed with us in an agile environment. So back to you.
Yes, and that's the most important part, right? Because we want practical applications of it. And I would say the best tip I could say is that we are hardwires for peaks and valleys. What do I mean is for what we're saying. And this is our brain, and it's also our heart. If you see heart, it's go up down, and it's saying it's our brain. What do I mean for that? Very much, our brain is not made for continuous change. It's not made for all the technologies development that we've been having, all the globalization, because all that goes against ups and downs, ups and downs. It's very much something like go up, 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 or something go down, down, down. So my first tip is let's try to artificially create those peaks. Let's try to artificially encourage our brain to say, okay, let's go up, up, up. Let's go down and rest. Let's go up and rest. So what does it mean? Coming back with the example of the endorphins and the dopamine, the sprints are great. Let's go up, up, up 2 weeks. We go to the top, but now let's release all the dopamine and let's pick up the endorphins only. So one of my first tip is let's allow for celebration after every sprint. Let's make sure we celebrate before we board the next sprint as much as we can, right? And for every project, it will be different, but just make sure you have plenty of celebration because this will release endorphins and will reduce the physical pain. Second, try to break changes in the smallest piece you can, because our brain gets overwhelmed with a lot of change. It goes against the peak and valleys. So if we, smaller pieces goes up and down, and the brain is less overwhelmed. Now, I haven't spoken a lot about brainwaves. It's just a tip I want to come here to give you here is allow time of mind wandering. Allow time of people not to be in these beta waves, which is all the concentration, focus, trying to resolve a problem. Include frequent times with the 2 weeks of the sprint for people to jump in and out. And how can we do that? Probably in the same way that we set up the room for learning. Let's set up a room, if it's possible, for relaxation, for reflection, for mind wandering, a room where we encourage everyone in the program to go there 5 to 10 minutes. Even if we make it compulsory in the beginning, people will not feel comfortable, but after you are allowing this mind wandering. So that's some tip to see if you can add that. Reinforce very much the perception of control, of certainty. And I think this is one of what waterfall does well, in a way. But it is a false perception of control. The fact that we have a long plan, that gives the brain some sense of perception of, oh, this is a clear roadmap. So let's try it within Agile. Once Agile is really well implemented, actually there is a real roadmap. Let's try to reinforce that. And that's especially advice for all the Agile coaches to help that for the master scrums as well. Something else, let's focus very much in the intention. Let's ask our group, our stakeholders, what is the intention of this sprint? It's different if you ask what is the intention than if you ask what are your goals. Your brain perceives it very different. The intentions is the what is what for. Ask the what for and don't ask the why. The why we tend to justify. We are in threat when we ask the why. Ask the what for. What is the intention? And when we ask the intention, the brain automatically will create new insights and new neural paths. And finally, at the end of the sprints, when we give the feedback, let's try to do in different, separate what is the positive feedback from the learning or developmental feedback. I know most of us have learned about this sandwich way to do feedback, where you do a positive, a developmental, and a positive. I'm not saying this is not right, but use the positive and the sandwich for what I call level 1 feedback, to say, oh, thank you, to trying to please the other person. But when we want to actually highlight and to leverage in a proper positive feedback, let's do it separate. Because our brain knows, okay, this is positive, what is coming next? What did I do wrong, right? So let's have it in separate, because positive feedback is much more important than what actually we think. With the positive feedback is where I actually come and I leverage what I have to do in the next sprint and so on. So I hope just in this cover some little practical tools. Neuroscience is a full course on its own, but I just wanted to give you a flavor and some practical tips how
that was really helpful. Thanks very much. I think we've got people a good clear definition of what neuroscience is, how it's brain friendly in terms of an agile approach, and then some practical tips. So that's great. Thanks very much, Tibisay.
Thank you.